All right, so I was having an issue with the integrated terminal where it just kept compiling for some reason. So I'm just running it in my standard terminal. So I just ran it there and I closed this one up. All right, so what I want to do now is, like I said, start to create some components. So let's go to source and let's create a folder called components. And in components, we're going to have a folder called layout. And let's start off with our app navbar. So I'm going to create a new file here, and we're going to call this app navbar.js. Now, this is essentially going to be a search bar. In fact, you know what? Let's call it search bar. That makes a little more sense. We'll say search bar. And let's go ahead and scaffold out a component here with RACF using the ES7 React extension. And search bar is going to, it's not going to have any props or anything like that right now. When we use Redux later, I'm going to explain how that works. Basically, you have app level state, and the way that you access pieces of state in your components is through props. You pass it down to props, but we'll get to that much later. So we can actually go to the materialize docs here and go to components and navbar, and the search one is down at the bottom here. And you can type it out if you want, but I'm just going to grab this and we're going to return that. We're going to change some things here. One, to get rid of these red lines here, this input has to have a slash. On the nav tag, I'm actually going to add a style here because I just want to add a margin bottom. So we'll say margin bottom and we'll set that to 30 pixels. And then I'm also going to change the color. By default, it's pink. I want it to be blue. So I'm going to say class name, and materialize has a bunch of different color classes. So we're going to use blue here. Let's see. Let's just save that and see what it looks like. So in app.js, we'll bring it in. So import search bar from /components layout search bar, and then we'll go ahead and embed that down here. Let's get rid of this my app. And you know what? I'm actually going to use a fragment here. We don't need this class name and stuff. So fragment. Okay, and then inside the fragment, let's go ahead and put the search bar. So we'll save that, and let's take a look. Oops, close that up. And that's what it looks like. Now I'm going to open up my console. So it looks like we have to change our class name, class to class name, and 4 to HTML4. Since I copied this from Materialize from the website. So I'm going to just highlight class and Control D to select all of these and change them to class name. And then let's change this 4 attribute to HTML4. So the next thing that I want to do is create our logs and log item component. And I think that what I'm going to do is just make the requests right from the component to begin with. And then later on, when we get into Redux, we'll move it to a Redux action. So let's create in components a folder called logs. And inside logs, we're going to have a file called logs, uppercase L, .js. And let's also create a file called log item.js. Okay, so inside logs, let's do RACF. And we're going to be using the use state hook because right now we're just going to store the logs in our component level state. But like I said, later on we'll move it to Redux. So let's say use effect because we want to be able to make our request, and that's where we're going to do it, is in the use effect hook. Okay, and then let's see, we have logs. Let's create our state. So I'll do const logs, and let's say set logs. That will be our, so that we can change the state, and set that to use state, and it's going to be an empty array by default. Now, since we're making a request to get data, let's have a loading as well. So we'll say loading and set loading. So use state, and the default for this is going to be false. Okay, so that's the state. Now I want to create a function here called get logs, and it's going to be asynchronous async arrow function, and let's call set loading, and let's set that to true, and then we'll make the request to our back end. Now I'm actually going to use the fetch API. I've been using Axios in the last two projects, but I want to give you a little diversity here, so we're going to use the fetch API. So let's say const res equals fetch, await fetch, because fetch returns a promise, and we're going to fetch /logs. Remember, we don't have to do localhost 5000 because we added a proxy. Now this doesn't return the data right away. It's not like Axios where we have res.data. We actually have to format it as JSON. So we're going to say const data equals await and then res.json. That will give us, that'll give us the data. Okay, and then I'm going to simply set the logs to the data, and then let's set loading to false. Okay, and for right now I'm just going to put an if statement here, and I'm going to say if loading, then let's just return in H4, and we'll say loading. We're actually going to use the materialize preloader, but for now we'll just do an H4. Okay, so now down in the return, let's see, get logs. Well, actually we have to call this, so we're going to do that in the use effect. So let's add that. So we'll say use effect. And let's say get logs. We're going to pass in an empty array because we only want this to run once. And just in case it gives us any warnings here, I'm going to say ESLint disable next line. Okay, so that should get called. Now, down in the return, we should now have access to logs. So we're going to use a collection here, which is like it's kind of like a list group for Bootstrap, if you're more familiar with Bootstrap. So let's do UL with a class name, and we're going to use a collection with header. And inside here, let's do an li with the class name of collection-header. So this is going to be the header, and in here I'm going to put an H4 with the class of center and say system logs. Okay, and then underneath that we want to map through our logs and output a list item, which is actually going to be the log item component. So I'm going to put an expression here with a conditional. I'm going to say if not loading and logs dot length is equal to 0, what this means, we'll say, what this means is it's not loading, so it's done loading, and logs length is 0. That means there's no logs. So I'm just going to put in a paragraph here. I can't use Emmet for some reason. So I'm going to put a paragraph with the class name of center, and let's just say no logs to show ... Okay, else then I'm going to want to map through the logs. So let's say logs dot map, and for each log I'm going to want to display a log item, but for now, just to test it out, let's just do let's just do an li. Oops. And we'll say log, whoops, got to put our curly braces, and then log dot, what do we have actually for our data? We'll do log dot message. So hopefully this worked. Let's check it out. Actually, we have to bring it into app.js first. So we're going to bring in logs. Let's go down here. Now under the search bar, I'm going to put a container class, and inside there I'm going to put logs. Okay, let's go to our app, and there we go. It works. Good. Now it's just telling us that a list should have a key prop. We'll take care of that, but it is reaching into our backend, into JSON-server, and it's pulling these out and listing them. All right, so I think I'm going to stop here, and in the next video we're going to continue on, and we're going to create our log item component, which is what we want to display here instead of just an li. Okay, and then once we do that, we're going to get our preloader going, because right now if I reload, see how it says loading real quick? I'm actually going to use the materialize preloader and make this look pretty cool. All right, so I'll see you in the next vid.